of continuing our mission of bridging cultural and educational understanding and trying to share information as best we can. Before I introduce our wonderful panel, I wanted to pay a very personal tribute to Michael Robinson, who some of you I know knew personally as I did, and who was, I've received various messages from members, which is why I'm mentioning him. He died, the death was announced today. He died at the age of 61 after a long battle with cancer. Michael, as anyone who knew him, was an incredibly nice and generous guy. I had a personal thing with him because he introduced one of my books in Madrid some years ago. I know John Carlin was a dear friend of his, and lots of members have known him. He was a great footballer in his time, played for Liverpool and other Premier League clubs, and then he went to Spain and played for Osasuna, and then he retired from playing and became a sort of great media pundit. He became a hugely popular figure, a true star. He was a household name in Spain, not just among Spaniards, but a lot of English expats, hugely cultured. He had a dry humor. He spoke Spanish with an appalling accent, but that was part of his charm. And he was really, really a lovable guy. And just the message that was put out, obviously, by all his Liverpool supporters, he never walked alone, is obviously a very apt way of drawing in all the other heroes and heroines who have died in recent weeks, not least those who've been fighting on the front line. And I wanted, on behalf of all the society, to pay tribute to all those people who have suffered pain, suffering and loss in these last few weeks, both in Spain and the UK. Without more ado, I wanted to introduce our great panel to those of you who don't already know them. I'm sure you already do. So Stephen Wright, former British ambassador to Spain, a dear friend, former chairman of the BritishSpanish Society, now a much distinguished patron, and my two much loved colleagues, Romero and John Carlin, two absolute stars of their trade, both fantastic journalists and authors. Anna was, as some of you will recall, was a fantastic correspondent in London for El Mundo, then became an independent commentator. John has worked for the Sunday Times, for the Independent, for El País, and currently is a columnist with La Vanguardia, and has written some fantastic books on politics and football. And I wanted to come straight in with a sort of personal question to all three of you. And I think I will begin with Anna, then go on to Stephen, and then John, which is just very, very briefly to share it and start on a personal note, given that we've all been having personal experiences. Tell people where you are, first of all, and how you've been living these extraordinary times in recent weeks. So Stephen. Sorry, Anna first.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you. Thank you for your nice words, and lovely to be here with all of you. Well, I'm currently in Madrid, and I've been here for 47 days now at home, because we started earlier. The government closed the country Saturday, March 14, but we decided to stay home from March 11 because that's when they closed school. My daughters go to the British Council School. They're making a fantastic job teaching them online, so that's working very well. And it's good. We're very privileged because we have a lovely dog, and we can go out 4 times a day, and that gives us a lot of energy, and it's good. I mean, it's tough, but we're fine. We're healthy, and we're safe here in Madrid.
It's good to know. Stephen.
Thank you. Well, I'm in southwest London, and my wife Abby and I have been holed up in the house since a bit later than Anna, from about the 17th of March, and the government lockdown came into effect on the 23rd of March. So we're about a week behind the Spanish timetable. Since that time, we've been pretty much at home, and I don't think that I have spoken face to face, close up, to any other person since the 17th of March. Close up, that is. You can speak at 2 meters distance, which is perfectly feasible, but it's not exactly an intimate conversation. I spent my time in that period, firstly, going out walking the dog like Anna. It's a great privilege to be able to get out. We've had wonderful weather in southern Britain for the last month. And so I go out for about an hour every morning, and I've been watching the spring coming and listening to the birds. And it's a real treat because there's less traffic noise, less pollution, and you can see and enjoy the spring a great deal more than you can most years when we're all too busy. Otherwise, I've been working remotely at home, discovering Zoom, attending Zoom meetings, writing a bit, reading a lot, and my wife Abby has been at home also. She's cooking for us. She's cooking for, joining a group of friends, cooking for the COVID ward at our local hospital, because the nurses and the staff don't get out much. So this friend who's a caterer is taking food in to them about once a week, and Abby's joining that effort. Otherwise, it's for her, it's a bit working at home also. We have our good days and our bad days, depending on how purposeful we feel. But we're certainly feeling that we've been here for quite a long time.
Thank you, Stephen. John.
Yeah, I'm in Barcelona. Stephen says he's holed up. You don't know what holed up is, mate. We don't get the 1 hour walks. We're allowed out every 3 or 4 days to go into the supermarket. So let me make that little point. Hold up is relative. I'm taking it. I'm handling it well. I'm used to working from home. I have been doing so most of my life. And the only thing I miss is at the end of a day's hard work, going off and having a few drinks with my friends. On another note, you mentioned Michael Robinson. Can I put it to the panel that Michael Robinson is perhaps the most popular Brit ever in the history of Spain? Who are the contenders?
That would be probably one to discuss later on, but that's a good one. I will not bore you with my personal details, because those of you who've been following my London diary on our website will be more than familiar with my walks in Battersea Park and other meditations on God and existence. So I will not go there. I wanted to go on to the second question, where we're going to be getting into more the sort of nitty-gritty of the politics. Before doing that, I simply wanted, not that some of you need reminding, of a certain time scale. As we know, to the extent that we know anything about the Chinese, this probably began in a gathering probably sometime in November last year. We also know that a very courageous young doctor who subsequently was censored and disappeared set up the alarm bells in December. We also know that the first recorded coronavirus case in the UK was in January 29th, 2 patients diagnosed in York. On the 31st of January, the first diagnosed case in Spain was in La Romera, a German tourist, at which point Fernando Simón, the country's health chief, told reporters, "We believe that Spain will have at most not more than a few diagnosed cases." On the 31st of January, most of the media here in Britain, and indeed most of our government, including the Prime Minister, was taken up with the issue of Brexit. I simply wanted to remind you of that, and then obviously fast forward, as you know, and as Anna has mentioned, Spain declared on the 14th of March their state of alarm. We might discuss this in a minute, why they call it state of alarma, not un estado de emergencia. And then more than a week later, on the 23rd of March, the British announced their equivalent of a lockdown, which is, as we know, not quite as strict as the one in Spain. Now, simply having set that context, I wanted to return to the panel, and I think probably in a similar order. And knowing how independent you all are, to speak quite frankly about how you regard the governments that you've been living under and the societies you have lived in recent weeks, how they have responded to this crisis, and which political leaders, if you can identify any of them, have distinguished themselves in any shape or form, and have anybody, John has already suggested we should praise Michael Robinson, but poor guy, he wasn't really involved in all this. Has anyone really distinguished himself politically in this whole business? Anna, could we begin with you?
Thank you, Jimmy. When I joined this distinguished panel, I was listening to Pedro Sanchez at the same time, because he just literally finished his explaining what the roadmap is going to look like in this country. And we've got good news and we've got bad news. Is the level of contagion is very, very low now. It's 0.6% compared to 35 when this all started. The bad news is that it looks like we're going to be pretty much locked down until the end of June. There's going to be 4 phases, and the last one will end in different provinces. This is another important piece of news that he just shared with us. It's not going to be the whole country. It's going to be province by province. They will all have different rules, and it's quite complicated. So how have they done until now, until this roadmap that has just been announced? It depends, Jimmy. I mean, as you know Spain very well, and you're Spanish also, and you know how dysfunctional we can be politically. So if you ask somebody on the right, this person is going to be quite negative. If you ask somebody on the left, this person is going to be less negative with how the government has been done. I think the objective facts that we have on the table is like the rest of the governments in the rest of the world, except very few exceptions. The Sanchez government sleepwalked into this crisis, obviously. From my point of view, the last week, the week between March 8 and March 15, that was really a loss of time. I mean, that was really bad. Nobody knows what they were doing. They were probably fighting among themselves. You know, we have a coalition for the first time since the Republic. So dealing with 2 different groups in government is not as easy. But the last week was a shame, really. And that is a mistake that they made, clearly, and that they share with a lot of governments, including, of course, the government of the UK. I think that's the biggest mistake. And then there's a blunder that everybody saw last week, and that was really very, very big, is when they announced that the children would be able to go out and go to the pharmacies, to the supermarket, and to the banks, which is the places where everybody is trying to avoid. I think those 2 moments were the moments where the Spaniards were more critical with the government. But generally speaking, I would say it's too soon. There's too much fog yet. I think we have to wait and see how this whole story finishes and how the numbers are, how high the numbers are. And then we will be able to decide how badly or how well they have done.
Stephen, thank you. Anna.
Yes, we also lost at least a week in March, but I think really we lost a lot more time than that in Britain. The whole period of March and February, when we were perfectly aware of this looming epidemic, was really, it was treated as a minor problem, a lot of expressions of confidence in the ability of the national health system to cope, and a marked reluctance to take extraordinary measures against it. The roots of that go back many years. It is rather horrifying to think that both the incoming government of 2010, that is 10 years ago, and the incoming government of 2015, 5 years ago, both conducted national security reviews when they came into office. In other words, reviewing the major threat to the security and safety of the United Kingdom. And both those reviews concluded that a pandemic was very high, if not the highest threat to the safety and security of Britain. Nevertheless, in the subsequent 5 years, almost nothing was done to prepare for that pandemic. The reasons for that are the priority given to fiscal reductions of expenditure and fiscal balance and to austerity. But the consequences of that are very much with us in the conduct of this crisis. Because to go to your question, I would say that British society in general and London society in particular, which is where I live and where the virus has been had the worst effects, British society has responded extremely well to the lockdown. They have accepted the rationale for it and more or less complied well with the requirements of the lockdown. I read this morning in the paper that there have been, the Spanish police have issued some 750,000 fines during the period of the Spanish lockdown. Well, insofar as I can get figures, and there aren't many of them, up to April the 17th, the UK figure was 3,200. So there's very strong compliance with the lockdown here. And the second thing that is absolutely front and center in the British perception of this crisis is the fantastic performance of the National Health Service, and more particularly of its people. The doctors, the nurses, the specialists, everyone, it's clear to everyone that they are dedicating themselves at some personal risk and are achieving great things, because the National Health Service has not been overwhelmed by this crisis, and indeed is coping better than anyone expected. The two biggest problems are and these are the consequences of the lack of investment over the last 5 years, the lack of testing for the population, and our testing resources are nowhere near adequate and far below that of other European countries, and also the lack of personal protection equipment for health workers, because we haven't invested in, built up a stock. Over this period in which great satisfaction and admiration for the NHS has developed, but dissatisfaction with the inability of the government to fix the problem of both tests and of PPE, the government has, I think, been rather fortunate, because I think there has been an absence of active politics for a number of reasons. Firstly, Parliament went into recess shortly after passing the legislation to implement the lockdown. So they've been away for a month and are only now getting back into business. Secondly, the Prime Minister fell ill and has been away for 4 weeks with coronavirus. He delivered himself a very heartfelt statement of appreciation and gratitude to the health service when he came out, who he said, no question, saved his life. But politically, his absence has been very notable, because in that period, the issues of the unsatisfactory performance over health, over testing and over PPE have come to the fore. And the other ministers of the government who've been coping with this have been, frankly, wooden and leaden-footed about it. The public communications, which were good to start with to engage the cooperation of the public, have really got very bad. Boris Johnson is only now back, and I never thought I would be saying this, but I'm glad to see him back in the lead, because his capacity and willingness to strike a balance is better than anybody else's in the government. The last thing
Stephen, if you want to just wrap up there, because we've got a lot to get through, and I'm just conscious of time. But if you want to sort of wrap it up.
Well, we're all beginning to think about what happens after the lockdown. I think not much will happen after the lockdown. We have a review date on the 7th of May, but this lockdown is going to continue, and for better reasons than in Spain, because the figures are simply not there yet.
Thank you. John.
Well, as a journalist who's made a career out of bashing governments over the head around the world, I find myself in the curious position of being rather more sympathetic to most governments. It's difficult in the case of the American government and Donald Trump, but I think that, you know, it was Tony Blair who was saying just recently that he was very sympathetic to the current British government. And the point being that, you know, we are so absolutely in the dark as to the science of this. People really do not know what this little critter is really all about. We don't know yet, you know, we don't have an accurate mortality rate for people who are infected. We don't know for sure whether once you've had it, you're immune to it. There's all kinds of unknowns, and you see, for example, the example of Sweden that is so interesting in the sense that they have been taking a sort of different position to everybody else, leaving the bars and restaurants and shops open and the schools up to the age of 16. And they haven't done as well as their Scandinavian partners, but in terms of the figures, but they've done better than UK or France or Spain or Italy. So I think that my inclination is to reserve my judgment on how governments have actually, the measures they've taken, and wait for the inevitable big post-mortems that will come along. Secondly, I say that in particular as regards the British government, the communication, as opposed to the measures, which, like I say, I'm prepared to just park and wait on that. The communication has been absolutely pathetic. I mean, this Matt Hancock character, you just see him there appearing like a sort of rabbit in headlights. You see him appearing live in these press conferences as if wondering, you know, what the hell am I doing here? Please, mummy, come and get me out of this situation, which I'm just simply not remotely up to. And Dominic Raab is not a lot more impressive. But in the background, like I say, all this scientific opinion at odds with each other about this, that, and the other. One day we're going to use this hydroxychloroquine. It's going to be the magic solution. Then it's not. Then it's going to be this remdesivir stuff. Then it's not. Now they're telling us tobacco is a good thing to stop the coronavirus, having been told by everybody this is the moment to quit, and so it goes on. Finally, I pick up on the point that Anna was making about how people on the right wing have been bashing the government here in Spain, the left wing have been more gentle. I find it utterly pathetic that people, when we have this joint threat that we all must face, people are still playing the petty, frivolous, silly little old political games and point scoring. You know, I saw some leading Partido Popular guy, I think, in the press today, criticizing the government for improvising. What the hell can you do other than improvise in this situation, for Christ's sake? And then meanwhile, you've got sectors of the Catalan independentismo saying, oh, if we'd been independent, we'd have done it much better. You know, sod off. What kind of crap is that? So I find it deeply irritating to see all these people, you know, at a moment like this where we're facing basically sort of an alien invasion, when the whole world must come together, that you get these little creeps who try to make, you know, can't get out of the old groove of scoring party political points in electioneering.
I would gather from that a certain anger, Mr. Carlin. I don't really want to get into too much of cultural stereotyping here, but just to go back to, I'm sorry I brought you to a halt, Stephen, but just from my observation, it seems to me that one, to go into the kind of cultural issues of what we're learning from say the political class here and the political societies, it strikes me as an Anglo-Spaniard that looking at the British, there have been two very clear themes here. One is this constant reference point feeding into the national narrative of the Second World War. And secondly, linked to this is the figure of the Prime Minister, for whom, whether we like it or not, his iconic figure is Winston Churchill. Indeed, you just have to, in order to understand what Boris thinks of himself, you don't need to go much further than to read his biography of Churchill. And I just refer to you to some of the phrases that he used when he came out of hospital for his first appearance yesterday. He talked about grit and guts, effort and sacrifice, and evidently is now putting the NHS on a par with the RAF in the Battle of Britain, i.e. this whole kind of, again, feeding into the national narrative, bringing the whole nation together. I would put it to the panel that possibly Boris at the moment in his popularity polls confirm this, is hitting the right note, whether we like it or not. By comparison, as John would say, and I wouldn't use quite the terminology he's used, but it seems to me that the Spanish political class, to quote Paul Preston's recent book, is betraying its people yet again. It seems to me, just as Anna said, you know, depending, and my God, I have regular conversations with people in Spain on a daily basis, depending whether you talk to the left or the right, you get exactly what Anna said. And you have a situation, it seems to me, that you have a prime minister and a deputy prime minister who are practically not talking to each other. You have a so-called coalition of two parties, which are no longer a coalition. And as John Carlin has rightly noted, you've got an opposition PP that is simply pushing its own party interests. And probably at this moment, the only people who are actually playing fairly civilized game are Ciudadanos. But I noticed, and I wanted at this point to bring in John Kennedy, who's got a question, which may have already been answered by the panel. But John, you had a question about whether you thought about the Pacto de la Moncloa. Could you pitch the question?
Yeah, this is what I sent to Christina the other day. The question is as follows. Do the panel think that the proposed Moncloa-style pact proposed by Prime Minister Sanchez is an appropriate way to manage the difficult policy decisions that will arise in the coming months and in the short and medium term?
Anna.
Yes, Jimmy, I'm hoping not to use such a colorful language as John Carlin, which made me laugh very much, but he was quite right about what's going on here in Spain. Pactos de la Moncloa cannot be done in the same way that they were done, obviously, in 1977. It's another time, it's another situation. Under that name, what we all think about and what we're talking about is basically unity of all the parties to confront all the problems that we're going to be facing now. The short answer would be, yes, there's going to be something similar. There might be something similar. And in fact, we already have a sort of decaf version of the Pactos de Moncloa. Why do I say decaf version? Because the leader of the opposition, Pablo Casado, asked the Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, to bring the pactos out of the Moncloa Palace into Parliament. So they have demoted the so-called Pactos de la Moncloa into a parliamentary commission. It's a good step. I mean, at least they managed to get together and decide they were going to work in Parliament. They're not going to do it as big as in 1977, with all the parties being led by the Prime Minister, which was Sanchez's will, but at least they have decided they're going to get together, even with the extremists, even with the independentists. Everybody will be there in the commission. Now, what will happen? Well, hopefully something will come out and they will together decide how to deal with the tremendous economic problem that we're already having. I wouldn't be 100% sure because the political panorama here in Spain is very complicated, but at least they've done this step. Why did they do it? Because 80% of the Spanish people in the last CIS poll said they wanted unity. It wasn't easy and they were not happy with it. It took an hour of conversation to come to that agreement, but it looks like it will start and they will start working in Parliament. So that's a piece of good news.
Thank you, Anna. John, I've just got a new question that's come in, which I think you're just the man for it. It's from Julio Romo, and he's asking the question, how have the different autonomous regions in Spain been hit by this and have been coping with it? And again, what does this tell you about Spanish society? It's Julio Romo, and he says this: I'm coming to this from Bilbao, but have friends in Madrid and family in Cádiz. You, of course, John, are in Barcelona. So given all those factors, you've got quite a good overview of, in order to answer this question.
No, I don't. I don't really have a very good overview. I haven't been sort of having a detailed look at what's happening in Murcia and Sevilla and this and that. So it would be fraudulent of me to attempt to answer the question. Maybe Anna would have more thoughts on this.
To give some indication about you've made a veiled reference, but with some respect to in terms of language, in terms of where you're sitting, in terms of Catalonia, is this crisis going to make the issue of Catalonia easier to resolve or more difficult?
Okay, number one, I couldn't give a damn on the Catalan independence question right now. It just, like along with Brexit and all kinds of other frivolities which have been centre stage for the last few years, they've now assumed their rightful place at the back of the queue in the light of this serious issue which confronts us all, as opposed to these optional, frivolous things like Brexit and Catalan independence. That's one thing I say. So I don't want to go any further on that. Otherwise, in terms of regional differences in Spain, well, surprise, surprise, the two places where you've had the epidemic has struck hardest have been Madrid and Barcelona. It doesn't require any sort of rocket science to figure out that it's where people are most sort of closely bunched up and where the epidemic is going to spread most quickly, whereas you go to some remote part of Murcia and there's nothing going on. And so therefore it's a hell of a lot easier for the autonomous governments there to deal with these things than it is here, and therefore it makes some sense. I wasn't aware of the latest news that Anna's conveyed, that they're going to be doing a sort of a phasing out of the lockdown on provincial ground. But obviously Barcelona and Madrid are going to be, I'm very sad to note, back of the queue. But I think also, in the general weighing up, when the great reckoning comes, the great postmortems on who did it well, what autonomies did it better, what countries did it better, there's also, as I saw the incoming German ambassador to Britain was saying on Andrew Marshall on the BBC, he was saying, look, yes, we Germans have done it jolly well, it seems, but there's also a factor of luck. Whether you got some super spreader arrived from via Wuhan or via the Austrian Alps and landed in Barcelona. And there is that element of the whole thing too. There is an element of random madness about this, and therefore yet another reason, I think, to be cautious in getting out the club and bashing the governments over the head.
Thank you, John. Stephen, I haven't forgotten you. It's just that the question we're now coming to, unless Roger, did you want to pitch a question? Roger, I saw you waving.
No. I was texting.
Okay, I'm getting inundated with chats, but I'll try and get to them bit by bit, because we have got questions quite coming at a rate of knots. The question I wanted to really move on to is an important one, like all the others, but it's to do with economics and business, and I know from seeing the screen that various people that might have some interesting questions to raise on this, but we are absorbing a kind of amalgam of questions from various people. And the general one is obviously, what does the panel think are going to be the longer term consequences for the economies of the respective countries? Stephen, could I begin with you in terms of the UK?
Well, yes, I think we're just beginning to get into the economic consequences of the crisis. Up to now, the government has behaved on the economics with uncharacteristic speed and effectiveness and uncharacteristic generosity. after 10 years of seeking to reduce public expenditure and reduce the size of the state and reduce the involvement of the state in the economy, we have had a set of measures brought in late March by the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's somebody who was not very much prepared for the job, of great breadth. And furthermore, he has shown a willingness to listen to criticisms of the measures and to improve them as he goes along. So I think that the economic response up to now, aimed at keeping the economy in being, has been rapid and effective, but there will be a price for this. And we are a long way short of beginning a discussion about how that price will be paid, if at all. All I would say is that I think that both because of this crisis and because of the recent general election in Britain, which Boris Johnson and the Conservatives won by a handsome majority and won by appealing to a whole set of normally Labour seats in the Midlands and in the north of the country, there is a mood now to move away from austerity and to move, and inevitably, I think after this crisis, there will be a need and some appetite for having a state and a government machine that is more actively involved in the economy than it has been over the past few years. I mean, I just think, for example, of the question of food security, which has been shown up by the crisis to be acute, how we're going to manage that in circumstances also of Brexit. There is the matter of decarbonisation, the issue of decarbonisation, and there are a whole lot of other things which will be questions that arise from the wind down from the crisis, in which the government will have to be very actively involved. So we're going to have a large increase in public debt, and we're going to have, I would suggest, a more active government role in the foreseeable future, perhaps for the duration of this government at least, till 2024, than we have been accustomed to in the past.
Anna, can you also, can I just remind you to try and keep your answers relatively short, but can you give your sort of take on the economics of Spain and how this is going to affect them?
I think Anna may have become disconnected.
John?
Well, I mean, the general consensus is that we're talking really sort of catastrophic consequences, and an awful lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and it's going to be very, very tough. And in particular, looking at Spain, for heaven's sake, which I think it's 14% of the GDP depends on tourism. Tourism 2020, foreign tourism is absolutely shot. What is it? 60 million people come from abroad on holiday to Spain every year. I'd be amazed if it got, the total sum for the year was much above 5. So that's a pretty dire right there. And then all the businesses that have been shut and all the people that are unemployed and all the, so there's no question that the consequences are going to be terrible, which brings us to another reason why I feel great sympathy for the governments, be it here, be it the UK, or be it elsewhere, that you've now got to handle this whole business of unlocking the lockdown. And you have, on the one hand, you've got to balance the lives that are at risk from the coronavirus against the lives that are at risk from economic disaster. In England, they call it somewhat, crassly, cleverly, health versus wealth. But that's misguided in the sense that it gives the impression of wealth is, people with a lot of money. The economy means everyday people with families suffering terrible consequences, possibly suffering other diseases as a consequence of this, suffering mental health problems, and of course suffering, the terrible fear of not being able to pay your rent and feed your family. And so it's now a very, very, very tricky business that it doesn't matter if it's Pedro Sanchez or Boris Johnson or whatever has to face, of how you're going to try and reconcile the two things. If the logic of all this social distancing and confinement is, which clearly it is, to avoid contagion and to stop the spread of the disease, then inevitably the minute that you lock down, you're going to get more disease and more people dying. So you get into this, macabre, impossible equation between saving avoiding deaths of people on one hand and avoiding deaths and disaster on another. And, you know, it's not an easy subject for anyone to address, even for us people sitting comfortably here. And if you're in government, and in particular, you know, the case, say, of the British government or the Spanish government that have been dealing with these utter frivolities, optional frivolities I've been mentioning before, such as Brexit and the whole Catalan question, which have been so badly handled. You know, you're in this groove of just sort of cheap populism, cheap shots, just playing, you know, kind of a slightly more elegant form of Donald Trump in your politics, and suddenly you're faced with absolutely critical life or death issues. And so apart from the fact that it'd be difficult for anybody, for Winston Churchill or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, it's going to be particularly tough for these guys who thought politics was an entirely more jocular, frivolous affair than it's turned out to be.
Justin, poor old Anna is desperately trying to get back into the meeting room.
Yes, she came in, and she came in briefly and evidently couldn't, she was stuck on mute, and she's dropped out again for some reason. I'm not quite sure what's going on.
If someone can try and get her, we will continue, but it will be good to try and get her back.
I think, Christina, have you got her number? Have you been trying to get hold of her? Did I see you on the phone to her, Christina?
Yes, I'm in contact with Anna. Anna is trying to connect with the panel. The problem is she says it's in the waiting room, but she gets into and then it's again out. So I think she's trying. Okay. So maybe Justin, you can check the waiting room all the time and trying to get into the meeting.
Okay, let's just keep going. The obviously so many areas of the economy and businesses that are being affected by this, and the question of you know, which businesses we can speculate may bounce back, for instance, and who are going to be the losers. It seems to me that in terms of British-Spanish investments, tourism is a huge area for obvious reasons. I've got Sarah Lovett there, who is in Mallorca and has lived there for many years. Mallorca has been very much in the news, as we know, because the Germans have led the charge. Germans with second properties there have written to the Spanish government and said, let us back in, and have been told, not quite bog off, but it's certainly not going to be allowed in right now. Sarah, if you'd like to just come in, could you give us a sense of what's it like in the Balearics at the moment? I mean, what's the feeling there? Can you get Sarah on?
Is that me now? What do I have to press?
Yeah, you're on, yeah.
Well, the situation here in Mallorca is presently quite calm, despite the last Sunday when children were allowed out with parents and gathered on beaches and parks and completely blew it. I personally had the virus when I came back from Madrid at the end of February, and I've been in lockdown since the 9th of March, so it'll be 8 weeks of not going out. And I think, well, I have lots of things to say, really. First of all, I think communication from governments, the clearer it is, works better. And there's been a lot of praise for female leaders around the world who sort of spell it out. There's been random police behavior here, which some feel is unfair. But I think a big dichotomy is these people who are allowed out with dogs all day, whilst everybody else is undergoing a very hard lockdown. Jobs have been lost. Mallorca is seasonal. Tourism is obviously the main economic factor keeping everybody going, and that's now not happening. And the president of the government here is trying to get control of ports and airports, which, as you know, are in the hands of the central government. So there's problems there to sort of decide how we're going to come out of lockdown. Care homes obviously have been the losers. And I think Spain as a country is very generous with their time, and they have a lot of volunteers coming forward, making masks, providing food, visiting people on their own. Personally, not having tourists in Palma is a blessing because we've kind of gone with all these cruise ships berserk. and nature has come back. The island is clean, and we have good local food, which has been ignored. So now the people winning are the local farmers who are providing fresh vegetables, meat, and dairy, which has been imported in the past because it's all sent to the hotels. People, I think, believe that there will be some tourism later on in the year. The recent case of this German who has a home in Andratx and a business wrote with 200 other German homeowners saying that they were not going to be in Magaluf, which is the cheap sort of balconing drinking tourism on the island, because they would be going to golf courses. And I think he was politely told to fuck off and not get in the way of what is essentially health first.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much. I'd like to, again, to the extent move on. I'm delighted that Anna's back. Anna, we're on the economy. Anna, you are back, aren't you? She was. She disappeared again. I want to move on.
I can see her on screen too. I don't know whether she may very well be having difficulty joining us. I may suggest that she joins us on audio only.
Okay, there is an area which I hope we have people willing to talk about it because who registered, which is schools and universities. Have we got Caroline Gray or Maite Aguirre or Mercedes Poser in?
Yes, I'm here, Caroline Gray.
Oh, Caroline, fantastic. How are you?
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you.
Caroline, if you could just quickly introduce yourself and very quickly.
Yes, I'm a lecturer in politics and Spanish at Aston University in central Birmingham.
Thank you very much. Caroline, just in terms of where you're sitting, how does it look?
Well, at the moment, I would say it's looking more and more likely that universities will be moving towards online only from September, October. I think they're particularly worried about admissions in terms of, being able to give a coherent narrative to students to applicants who are applying at the moment who need to make their decisions for next year. And certainly we're waiting in my case, we're waiting for Aston University management to decide, but they want us to be prepared to offer online only should it come to that. And particularly also being aware of the fact that even if we started in person come September, October, it may be that if there's further waves of this, we may suddenly have to shift to online. So certainly we need to be prepared for that. In terms of what's happening at a national level, UCAS, here in the UK, the UCAS system is where where A-level students apply for university. Decisions whereby applicants have to make their decisions as to which universities they're putting as their firm and insurance choices. UCAS has pushed back the deadline. That's usually an early May deadline, but it's been pushed back to mid-June. And I think in part that's, to give students more time to see what's happening, and also to give universities more time to be able to give a coherent picture to those applicants as to what might happen come September.
Thank you. We've talked about universities. I wanted just very, very briefly to talk about schools. I know what one of the real challenges has been for parents dealing with their children and at the same time trying to keep virtual without schools being open. As far as I know, we've got various parents with children. Matthew, my neighbour, are you still there or not?
I am indeed, Jimmy, yes.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Matthew, of course, could also give, as a leading man of the city, could also give a quick insight as to how he sees the financial sector. So can we have a double whammy from you, how you see the city emerging from this, but also how you're dealing with your two girls?
Yeah. Well, I'll link those if I may, because the one thing that I've been hugely impressed by looking across my colleagues, our team at work, is a lot of people do have school-age children. We've managed to take 98% of our workforce to home working, And look, I think, and I'd echo your comments at the beginning, we're hugely conscious that those of us in financial services and professional services have this ability to retreat back into our homes, which obviously key workers and people keeping us safe simply don't. So yeah, we feel, I think, we are very, very fortunate, and we owe them a huge debt. But it has been actually a really interesting example of how when people are challenged to go and work remotely and maintain productivity levels, even with kids, they've managed to do that. There is a lot of ingenuity there. So I've been really impressed by what my colleagues have done, my teams have done, and what the city has done. And in a small way, have sort of helped to keep at least some of the economy up and running.
Thank you, Matthew. Anna, if you're back, is she back? Anna? She's off again.
I can you
yeah,
hear me?
Yes. Okay, hi, darling. Thanks for your back. As a parent of two beautiful girls, what's it been like in terms of schooling?
I said at the beginning, I mean, it's been really fantastic. I need to say it again. The British Council School here in Madrid is doing a phenomenal job. I mean, they are teaching them online. I can hear them. In the house, I have so much respect for the work that they're doing, because they're keeping them busy from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4:30, and they're behaving wonderful. I mean, it's really amazing how children adapt, and they are just going to school. They say, I'm going to school, I'm in school, and I'm back, and now and so they're doing really well. Sadly, the Prime Minister announced today that there's not going to be any school in Spain until September. Only maybe in June, the little ones under 6 whose parents have to go work, they might be allowed to go to special places to be taken care of, but there will not be any school and university back until September. So there we go. That's it. They will have to stay for the next 2 months in online school.
Thank you very much, Anna. To move on to another subject straight away, to John Carlin. This is one for you, John. Are you missing football?
Am I missing life? I mean, I don't know there's anything, apart from basic things like eating and having a roof over your heads, I'm not sure there's anything in the world more essential and important than football. But at the same time, I'm in a state of sort of mourning. I'm actually almost resigned to the possibility of football never ever coming back, and so I'm just sort of treasuring the memories and trying to move on. I mean, it's as if something has died in my life. It's the great subject of conversation of the world, and we're denied it. I mean, I read the papers every day religiously. I always dedicate at least 20% of my time to reading the sports papers, sports pages. Now I don't even glance at them.
To move away from footy for 1 second, although I know that Carlos Oppe would love to talk about Chelsea. Isabel del Rio, from a cultural point of view, and you've got a very good overview as a Spaniard living for many years in London with the cultural community. How do you see the cultural side, that rich seam of Spanish artists in the UK in particular? How are they going to emerge from all this? Isabel, hang on a minute. Have you got this? Can you bring her in? Justin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, the solution is technology, and luckily we have it, and we are all communicating with each other. I, for example, today I participated in a reading with a Spanish publisher, and what is it called? Enclave. They are a bookshop in Madrid, and they created something called Poesía en Voz, and that includes something like 50, 60 poets. We read our own stuff. There's a little biography, and that's, I have to say, that's gone viral. So that's the way we are surviving with technology.
I have a flamenco dancer, hopefully, and a producer who's done a lot of online stuff well before this crisis. I'm just wondering if she's around. That's Sandra Castel. Sandra, are you around? Sandra Castel? That's a pity. Peter Martland, if you're still there in Cambridge, you've been looking very, very calm and collected.
Sorry, James, it's Sandra here.
Oh, Sandra, right. Sandra, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien.
Sandra needs no introduction, but she's the most beautiful dancer. And anyway, you've obviously, you know, you didn't need the coronavirus to go virtual or viral or whatever you call it. How have you been coping?
Yes, really well, actually. I mean, it's been hard as for everyone. It's been great to hear all your stories, by the way. Thank you. It's been hard in terms of all our theatres are closed. As you know, we don't know exactly when they're going to reopen again. So we have loads of show productions, musicals, dance shows. At the West End at the moment, we had big international touring plans for this spring and summer, and all that's been cancelled. So it's been hard to reschedule, to cover costs, see all the dancers and performers out there that obviously have lost their jobs from one day to another, and don't know when they're going to be able to come back. So it's it's difficult for the industry at the moment. And but in terms of trying to renew ourselves, which is obviously what we need to do, and reinventing ourselves, good news is we've created loads of online exercising, teaching classes that are incredibly successful. And if anything, it's helping people to exercise for once. Even people that have never really done it before have now managed to find a bit of time to do it, and find new hobbies and a new way to entertain and physically improve themselves, which is great.
Thank you very much. We're now on the hour. What I was going to suggest, Justin, are you all with me, by the way?
Yeah.
Wave your hands if you're still with me. Good. I'm enjoying myself. I hope you are. And I would suggest that we go on for 15 minutes more, if that's generally approved, unless some of you are busting to go off and have a drink. I know John's probably already had 3 bottles, but okay. All right. I wanted to go on to a bit of a difficult one, a more cerebral one, which is that, and Dr. Peter Martland in Cambridge, been waiting very patiently there. He did ask a question about, you know, what would happen if, as a result of this relaxation, if we are going towards that, we simply, as happened in the pandemic, of the Spanish flu, which she's written at length about. The second wave was even worse than the first. You know, are we ready for it? But I wanted, rather than to end on that kind of down note, I wanted to see if we can go on an up note to the extent that one can, which is to touch another theme which is Peter is familiar with, which is beverage. It seems to me that one of the lessons of modern British history is that what happened in 1942, when Sir William Beveridge, you know, identified what he called the 5 giants to overcome. He named them as disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness, with the aim of cutting deprivation and maintaining full employment. That began to get going, as Peter knows better than anybody, with the coalition that was formed by Churchill. And then Churchill gets defeated in 1945 after the war. Attlee comes in, and we get the wonderful creation of the welfare state. And to go back to the beginning, the wonderful NHS, which unfortunately other governments since then have tended to leave to one side underfunded. The question for the panel, and we've had various questions, particularly on the issue of where are we going, what's going to happen to our planet. Can this be taken as an opportunity for a new paradigm? I mean, are we capable of going into not just normality or near normality, but grasp this opportunity to really transform the way we value our planet, the way we do things, and how we engage with each other across borders? Stephen.
Well, Jimmy, the planet. I can't predict how attitudes will evolve on this, but I think that the overall political case for decarbonisation has been made, and the issue that the world has been grappling with is how to do it at an acceptable cost and in an acceptable way. I think if you look ahead to the effects of this crisis and the general evolution of attitude on climate issues, I think it is just possible that we shall come out of this with a more energetic approach of governments to the welfare of their societies. Certainly, I think that's possible in the UK, and that will have to include decarbonisation. I think that if we are headed for a period of industrial change, industrial change and corporate change, caused by the virus and its after effects, it is possible that governments might be able to steer that in ways that are good for the planet as well as for economic recovery. But I can't really be any more optimistic than that. I think I'm on the side of optimism, but not pessimism. Just one last comment. I think we have probably had enough experience now of attempts at addressing the climate change issue at a global level to think that the likelihood is that if there is to be action on climate change, it's going to have to be at least led by some pioneer governments acting nationally.
Anna.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Ambassador Wright, but he just said something which is very important here in Spain, acting nationally. That is the main problem that we face here. And I was trying to find a word this morning, Jimmy, for guerra civilismo, you know, this terrible political virus that has infected Spain basically since the Peninsular War. I would go as far as that. And we do hope, I mean, we really, really hope that things will change after this, because it has already changed for us, citizens in the country. But we are not sure whether the political establishment, the Spanish political establishment, will understand and will do what needs to be done after this terrible pandemic. You asked at the beginning, what political figures have maybe done better or been behaved in a different way as expected here in Spain? I would mention two. I don't know if John Carlin would agree with me with that, but one is the mayor of Madrid, Almeida. He's a man that nobody expected much of really when he came, and he's doing a very good job. He belongs to Partido Popular. And then there's a woman from the Socialist Party, Margarita Robles, the defense minister. She's also behaving in a way that I would say is different from her colleagues and from some members of the cabinet. So there is hope. I mean, these two people show that if they want, things can change, and Spain should be a not only different place, but a better place after all this is over.
Thank you very much, Anna. John?
Well, there's always hope. If we didn't have hope, we'd all just, jump off a high building right away. I think that as regards the planet, one would hope that this ghastly experience, you know, all of us in the same boat, would extend to a perception that on the climate we're all on the same boat too, and might alter the thinking and concentrate minds. You talked also about whether this will change the way that we relate to each other. No, it won't. Human nature will remain exactly as it was. There will not be any sort of fundamental changes in the way that, you know, you will have the usual mixture of generosity, nobility, greed, envy, stupidity until the end of the world. We've had, you know, plagues, far, far worse plagues than this in human history, terrible, terrible wars, and we've always gone back to our default mode. So therefore, if you read Homer's Ulysses right now, you will find that it is absolutely recognizably human nature as it is today. So there won't be any you know, fundamental change in the way that we are as a consequence of this not very traumatic experience in the context of ills that have afflicted the world in the past. I would hope that perhaps one thing that's going to happen is we're going to get a lot more women in charge. It's quite clear, as someone observed before, that the countries run by women have been run much more efficiently. Women seem to be far more practically minded. Perhaps it's true that they're better at multitasking than we are, but I expect a trend whereby women more and more assume the reins of society, and we become people like you and Jimmy. You and I become what we were destined to be, which is decorative creatures, you know, enthralled to beings more enlightened than ourselves.
It's very kind of you. I'm seeing BJ or Brian James, who posed the question about, had an interesting question about the future related to what we're talking. Could you come in with a question?
Sure, I had two questions, Lovett.
Could you identify yourself to the people who don't know you?
Of course, my name is Brian James Douglas. Okay, and a wonderful discussion this evening. Shame we're going to be cut short, so I'll try and be quick. So whilst the UK and the European Union are parting ways, surely there should still be some form of cooperation between the two trading blocs on best practice in the area of health, and specifically establishing best practice that affects humanity. No one country seems to have really got this right, and I think the discussion that we've had so far does bear this out, because this isn't about competition and individual economies doing better. This is about promoting best ways to survive a major economic and health crisis.
I see that Janine Campos is there. Janine, great to see you. Could you come in on this with any thoughts you might have and identify yourself?
Yeah, hi, Jimmy. It's Janine Campos. I'm a retired banker, and I chair a solar company, a company that invests in solar plants in Spain. I'm not sure I could respond about the ability of nations to get together to solve each other's health problems, when I think largely they seem to be engrossed in trying to deal with their own problems right now. I think we're even seeing that within the European Union. So I don't really feel qualified to be able to answer that. I think I could say from more positive things from the climate change, which I also see as a question. I mean, we're still continuing to be very positive about the whole climate change, the move to renewables in Spain. We think the governments are going to continue to do that, particularly even the need to invest in infrastructure. I think that will go a renewables way. I mean, I do see a common theme there for the European Union in terms of still wanting to promote green, renewable energy and improve environment and climate change. I think those are the sort of things that will hopefully galvanize a spirit of cooperation amongst a lot of these countries, including the UK. I don't see why. I know there's the whole Brexit issue, but I think the UK still, being so close to Europe, will be part of that, hopefully, in the discussions, if not in, actively engaged with them. So whether that will go on to the health side of things, and people will take a far more altruistic view towards world health, I suppose that's a more difficult one, and I honestly wouldn't feel capable of answering that.
Thank you, Janine. Just before we leave, and I'm going to wrap up quite soon, Carlos Ope, who raised this issue, questioned originally. Very, very briefly, listening to those comments, have you anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Jimmy. I'm based in Madrid. I also run a small NGO doing environment. I think I'd just like to go back to very basic things. I have two small daughters, been 8 weeks with them, adolescents, and they're not thinking about consumerism. I live in a small village just outside Madrid. There's no noise here. I got birds in my garden. I just hope those values do extend after this crisis is over. I've got hope. I'm also optimistic. I also agree with John Carlin, human nature is human nature. So it's a big dichotomy. What's going to happen afterwards? Are we going to revert to reset? Or are these new values that we all touched upon, where we are closer to our family, where the values are much more real than they are in our stressful world, which we left behind? Will that be a change or not?
Thank you, Carlos. Before I go back to the panel to wrap up, Peter, give us, to the extent in a few sentences, a historian's judgment on where we're going.
Oh, I think we are in the eye of the storm, and it's very difficult to look forward. If we look back at similar pandemics, 1918, it's still tied up with the end of World War I, though it's actually difficult to unpick the two and see what kind of impact that had. I would point out, although it's been said that the Black Death is totally different to what we're experiencing now. The 4 years, 1347 to 52-53, saw about half the population of Europe killed. It led to the end of the Middle Ages, the end of feudalism, the redistribution of land, and the Reformation, and of course the Renaissance. I don't think we're looking at anything like that. What we might be looking at is the acceleration of some trends that were already present. For example, working from home. Our colleague who was in the city was saying just how all his teams are now working from home. After this, you'd see the collapse of land values in the city. You'd see the rental of office space come down. You'd see the whole infrastructure changing. So I mean, there is potential, but I think we're in the eye of the storm. And of course, there is the potential for a second wave.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can I ask the panel literally in 2 sentences, to the extent they want to, add anything they'd like to at the end before I conclude? Can I begin with Anna again?
Well, Jimmy, I have a very simple request. Do this more often. I think it's very, very valuable, and I've enjoyed it enormously. And it's great to have contact with people in the UK and here in Spain. And please do this again, hopefully not in the next pandemic, but now.
Thank you very much. Stephen. Hang on.
We're in an emergency now, as Peter says, and the effort and the demands on society and government up to now have been relatively straightforward, very strenuous, but straightforward. I think the phase that we're about to go into, which will last longer, of recovery, will be immensely complex and will throw up all kinds of opportunities for change, which wise people will have to grab and shape for the better. The one thing I would leave you with is that, much as I would like to be saying different, I don't see any reason to expect that the British government's thinking on Brexit is going to change. I think there's too much invested in it. There's too much of an electoral victory invested in it. It's all too short term, and I'm not even confident that the government will extend the period of the transitional period beyond the end of this year, in which case we're probably looking at departure from the EU without an agreement. It's very bad. And my one optimistic thought on that I would like to leave you with is a hobby horse of mine. I think Brexit, as a matter of one state leaving the EU and one economy leaving the EU, is more or less a done deal. It's going to happen. What I hope is that the links between societies and organizations and institutions do not suffer, and that we should all be more conscious of keeping up our institutional and our personal links across the EU than we perhaps have been over the last few years when it's been possible to take them for granted. And in that, the British-Spanish Society, like all other bilateral country societies in this country, have an important role to play.
Thank you. John.
I would just hope that the government here in Spain, where I live, and also in Britain, where so many people close to me live, will explain in adult terms, the way that Merkel does, what exactly is going on and explain the logic of this confinement. I'm quite prepared to abide by these rules, so long as it is explained to me why, in terms of health and the broader question of the economy, why this must be done. I want to be persuaded. If I'm not persuaded, I shall be strongly tempted to mutiny.
That would be a first, wouldn't it? Thank you. Well, look, first of all, thank you to my dear colleagues, my friends on the panel. It's been great listening to you. I also wanted to thank all these wonderful faces, but you're more than faces. You're part of I hope you feel part of a gran familia, which is the British-Spanish Society. And it's just great to see people in Spain, people here, different towns and cities. And I suppose this is one of the great connectivities of the internet. It doesn't substitute, as I said at the beginning, for a good gawa and some tapas and a game of very good footy, as John said, but we just have to deal with what we've got. I wanted to particularly thank Roger Galan, who's been my enforcer on this, and Justin Ellis, who's brilliantly hosted this, Cristina Arvarez, head of comms, and Cristina Oses have been working their butt off to make this possible as well. I just wanted to point out to you, those of you who were not aware, but we've been putting a lot of work into social media, into our website. What we've been doing today is part of our attempts, as I said at the beginning, to engage and communicate despite the challenges we all face. And in closing, I wanted to highlight that this time next week, i.e. 6 o'clock next Tuesday, our follow-up event, again hosted by Justin, is going to be again a first for us, which is going to be a great pub quiz, which will be obviously a slightly different tone and context to this one, but I hope will draw even more people to it than we have this evening. And that's really from me all, except to ask those of you who are not members to become members, those who have not kept up to date with your membership to bloody well get a move on. But also, more importantly, really, is to keep in touch. I've been looking at quite a few chats, people thanking the Society for putting this on. They've really enjoyed it. I get the feeling, the vibes that you all have as well. And I think it's been a great success, and I think we should do it again very soon. Muchísimas gracias a todos y suerte.